And we want to welcome Paul Seegert to the program. He's the managing partner at PCS Advisers. And he's with us this morning to talk about the rising cost of prescription drugs. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you for being with us today.
Happy to do it.
You are out in California, so it's kind of early out that way.
Well, I'm becoming a refugee. I'm in Nashville.
Oh, okay.
Today.
All right.
I'm trying to spend more and more time out this direction.
Okay.
Can't blame you for that.
Well, Paul, let's talk about this. There is a report, and it's a price watch report from the AARP, and it says that brand name drugs have just been skyrocketing.
That's true. If they had, about 15 years ago, if you were on one brand name drug, the system paid your insurance or whatever program you were on to get your health care was paying about $1,800 a year. And that's inflated to $6,600. And so it's outpaced inflation by more than 2 times. If it had grown just with inflation, that $1,800 number would be about $2,900 today.
Now,
it's definitely inflationary.
Is this for Medicare beneficiaries or just everybody?
It affects everybody. And even when you think about the cost of drugs for Medicare, that affects everybody too. We all pay taxes or contribute in some way. And so the whole system is really linked. And we're all really subject right now to a ton of waste in the cost of the drugs that we're consuming. And it's really out of control.
Well, Paul, give us an example of something like, what about a person that, I don't know, takes high blood pressure medicine or insulin?
Yeah, insulin's a perfect example. And I'm glad you asked about that one in particular because there's so much waste attached to the cost of insulin for the American consumer. It's incredible. We've got Humalog is the most commonly prescribed insulin in America right now. And in each time it gets dispensed, the plan is paying, whether that's a commercial plan or for an employer or whether it's someone's on the exchange or an exchange plan or someone's on Medicare or Medicaid, that plan is paying $550 for insulin per month. And when we look at that, we break that $550 out, $330 of that is waste. That has nothing to do with the real supply chain that we would all be familiar with in terms of normal business. You've got a manufacturer making the drug, Eli Lilly. You got a wholesaler wholesaling the drug, and then you've got an American going to a pharmacy to pick it up. The manufacturer, the wholesaler, and the pharmacy share $220 of that $550 number. They're profitable doing it. And then there's these pharmacy benefit managers who really perform a relatively small function in the process. They manage the formulary for the health plans and say, yep, this can be on the formulary, this is going to be the copay, and so on. And they coordinate some of the transaction. It used to be, many years ago, they performed that transaction for a small dispensing fee. Now, it's grown into a huge source of waste in our system where, in the case of insulin specifically, it's $330 of the $550 instead of the few dollars that it used to be. It's an incredible story of this post-ACA last 11 years in healthcare, where there's just been a ton of waste that has accumulated in the drug space, drug part of what we do.
Well, help me understand it a little bit. You're saying there's a ton of waste. When I hear it, I hear there's a ton of greed.
Absolutely.
Am I hearing that wrong?
No, you're hearing that absolutely correctly. It's when you look at that $330 that's added to the cost of insulin, and then and what we pay as consumers here in America, $550 a month, and then you go across our borders to other countries, these manufacturers will sell their very same product for a much smaller number. So uniquely here in our country, we allow the system to really generate most of their profits. 70%, let's say, roughly, of their global profits are made on American consumers, although people all around the world take these drugs. And when I look at that $550 and pull that $330 out, and then you follow that money and see where it goes, a lot of people have their hand in that, and it's benefiting a lot of people, and there's a lot of pressure against changing that, unfortunately.
Well, and I think at one time there was a conversation about the drug companies making too much money, and they were going to get they're already regulated, I'm sure. You can't just go buy any drug because it has to go through a system. But it just looks like they found a niche that they know how to make it now. It's not like there's any development, I guess, really being done unless there's a delivery method that's changing. And they know a lot of people need it, and it can just make their life miserable and maybe even kill them without it. And they're just taking advantage of who we are, because most of us have some kind of, if it's not just government, some kind of insurance. And they don't feel bad. They don't feel bad about it. That's what throws me off.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And the excuse that they give us, or the reasoning that's shared with the general public, is that, hey, prices have to go up because we have to fund research and development. There's some truth to that, and then there's some of that's not true. When you look at that insulin example that we've been using, the 330 that's waste, none of that goes to research and development. These pharmacy benefit managers that manage formularies, they don't manufacture drugs. So each year, and the drug industry has trained us as American consumers to accept an increase every 6 months or so. The price of drugs go up, and oftentimes it's about 5%. And there's really, what's the reason for that? I think because they can, and there's not a lot of political will to do anything about it. This is the healthcare part of our economy as a whole. It's a fifth of our economy now. When Medicare was started, it was only 5% of our economy was healthcare. Now it's a fifth of our economy, and this industry has such powerful lobbying that whether it's, when you see the government, kind of the power change, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, whoever, you don't see a lot of change in this area. And I think there's a lot of lobbying that goes on, and they've lobbied to get really good rules for themselves.
Paul, I have a question. So
Sure.
how, if you go across, because people do it up north, I know down here sometimes people go to Mexico and buy prescriptions.
Sure.
But how is a country like Canada, which I believe has socialized medicine, how do they get to pay less for their brand name drugs and we don't?
Right. Yeah, they simply, one of the funny things about, and not funny in a humorous way, but kind of crazy things about the way our system came together when Medicare was formed, in order to get that law passed, they had to agree to some silly things. For instance, Medicare can't negotiate directly. According to our current rules, Medicare can't negotiate directly with the drug companies and so on. So they don't get the chance really to negotiate effectively on the price that they pay for drugs, even though Medicare is the biggest purchaser of drugs in the world. And so that's rather crazy and needs to be looked at. And when you go to these other countries, they simply set limits. They're not going to allow the drug companies to sell it beyond a certain number. So then they can simply look at America as consumers and say, okay, well we'll go over here and make a few dollars on the drug, but we'll make hundreds of dollars on the drug in America. And so you probably heard there was some talk towards the end of the Trump administration about most favored nations, where they were going to say, hey, you can't sell your drug here to Medicare for a number higher than what you sell it to the lowest price you accept around the world, which was a really good conversation to have. But when the new administration came in, a lot of things were put on hold to evaluate whether or not they were really good ideas. And so a lot of that stuff has not really occurred, unfortunately.
Well, what about, I'm sitting here holding these things that they're advertised, the GoodRx cards and the discounts and stuff like that when you drive up and you're having to buy brand name drugs, and they give you a pretty significant discount in some cases. Are these things worth messing with? Absolutely.
Yeah, I have GoodRx on my phone. I recommend it to folks. Look at that. And when we build health plans for employers, we are able to clean up a lot of this waste. So there is some optimism to this whole story. There are pharmacy benefit managers out there that I would say are bad actors, that are adding a lot of waste. And then there's a whole movement in our industry of players that are willing to play more fairly and more ethically, I think, and not engage in that waste. And so this is getting fixed, but it's going to get fixed by I think those who actually have a stake in caring about what this stuff costs, and that would be the employer plans that are out there that are larger employer plans where they're shouldering that cost. It's not just tax dollars or whatever that's paying for it. They see that on their balance sheet. They see these dollars flowing through, and they have an interest in controlling them. So we're fixing it one employer at a time, bringing more transparency into this whole situation, and working with vendors that are willing to operate fairly. But we need to do that. We need to get that more widespread because it's just really out of control.
Well, as far as drugs go, did we learn anything, or did we take any kind of notes that might stick as far as how fast, if the government was willing to pour in the money and remove some regulations, how quick you can get a drug or a vaccine on the market when you decide it's an emergency? Are there going to be any positive things come out of that besides we've got 2 different versions of a shot for COVID? In the aftermath, are we looking at some other things and going, we need to turn these guys loose and let them create stuff and not drag things out for 5 or 10 years so people can stop dying?
Yeah, I think there are some good things we could definitely take away from that. And then the storm cloud that's on the horizon along with all of that is the fact that we need to have some regulation on, and I'm a free market person, so the word regulation sounds a little crazy coming out of my mouth, but we don't have a free market going on right now because there's so much of this funny business that's allowed. We need some common sense regulation that requires transparency on the part of the whole industry. What the risk we face is that as we develop more and more innovative solutions, therapies, drugs, we have to have some better system about how they get priced. We need a little more free market forces to work, because if you look at, as an example, this Alzheimer's drug that was recently approved here, first new one in 18 years, you probably saw that out in the news here in the last couple of weeks, which also affects, most of the folks with Alzheimer's are on Medicare. We've got 6 million people with Alzheimer's in this country. And this new drug came out, and there's a board of, when you look at this story, it's incredible. There's a board of 11 scientists that give their opinion to the FDA to say, hey, you should approve this drug or you should not. 10 of the 11 looked at the research that was provided by Biogen, the manufacturer, and they said the research does not show that it actually works. It's inconclusive, so we don't recommend that you approve this drug. The 11th scientist said, I'm not sure, so, that was his vote. You had 10 no's and 1 I'm not sure, and they approved the drug anyway, and the drug is priced by the manufacturer at $56,000 a year. And then each time a doctor prescribes that drug, Medicare is going to pay that doctor $3,360. So, let's raise our hands and say, do we think a lot of that drug is going to get prescribed? And of course it is. We're paying them to prescribe it, and it's going to get prescribed. And people need hope around a really debilitating disease. So we need to learn from what we did with this Operation Warp Speed, but we also need to be, have some common sense controls, because when you look at the overall cost of this drug and include the costs surrounding it to administer it, it's about $100,000 a year to have someone on this drug. And if we put 500,000 people on that drug out of the 6 million that have Alzheimer's, we're looking at that could be a $50 billion expense to Medicare. And when you look at and the whole system of Medicare spent, depending on how you analyze it, the whole system of Medicare spent between 90 and 135 billion on drugs total last year. So we're talking about one drug that could literally take a 90 billion number and turn it into 140 or 136, depending on how you look at it, and turn it into 180. Either way, that's one drug having a massive impact on the system. We need to do a better job of managing all this.
Yeah, but the drug company realizes that. They realize if we can get something out there the insurance companies are going to be demanded they pay for it because it's
That's
it's a
right.
horrible disease, and so we can
That's
put
right.
some crazy number on it, and the government's going to foot the bill for a bunch of people through different kinds of insurance.
That's right. The best customer you can get is the U.S. government, and they're lining right up.
Well, now I'm mad. I just come in here and had a pretty good day going for me.
Well, we want to thank Paul Seegert for being on our program this morning. He's the managing partner at PCS Advisers. And, Paul, where can our listeners find some more information?
Well, we post things regularly on our site and blog that we do. It's at PCSadvisers.com with an ERS in advisors, and we'll have new information weekly that we put out there.
All right.
All right, Paul, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.